I'm sitting here with the lake Femunden behind me, and that is one of the greatest lakes in Norway. And it is also the lake in the top of the catchment to river Klarlven and the Norwegian name river Trysilelven. The lake level is at 664 meters above sea level, which means that we are more than 600 meters above the level of Lake Vänern and Karlstad. There is of course a large difference in nature and environment up here in the north compared to what we can see further south. The river doesn't really start with this lake. There is also on the eastern side of this lake some tributaries from the Swedish side, from the area around Rogen, which is contributing water to Femunden, and then the river starts and goes in the southward direction. This Lake Femunden has an interesting story regarding the water levels. Back in the 1700s, in the middle of that century, there was a project to dam up this lake by 3 meters, and it was done. And the reason for that was to have water flowing not south to river Trysilelva and Klarälva, but north instead. There is not much difference in elevation between this lake and the neighboring river basin, river Glomma. So the damming up of 3 meters led to that the lake was drained northwards instead of southwards. But after some years, the Swedish king complained about this and claimed that the water should again go south to river Klarälven. Still there is some remains of this channel in the north end of the Lake Femunden, and it was used for many years also for timber floating, so the timber was taken to the Norwegian side and not ending up in Sweden. During the centuries there has been a lot of timber floating from Norway down to Sweden and Lake Vänern, so that has been the normal situation. But during some period the timber was going northwards and into Norway instead. In 1905, a little bit more than 100 years ago, the union between Sweden and Norway was ended, and there was a treaty in 1905 considering many different things between the two countries, but one important aspect was the water issues. There are about 40 rivers that are crossing the border between Sweden and Norway, and those rivers were an issue in this treaty. And one of the biggest or most important rivers are Trysilelva and Klarälva. So in this treaty the Swedish government and king claimed that there should be no interference or obstacles for the water from Femunden flowing down, reaching the Lake Vänern and Karlstad. Ever since the hydropower dams in river Klarälven was built, the first ones in the early 1900s, there has been problems for the fish, salmon and trout, to migrate and go upstream to spawn. There has been a demand for the hydropower company to compensate for this and to transport the fish with lorries past the many hydropower dams. At the same time, the fishing, the outdoor recreation and fishing is an increasing business up here, where there is not so much other businesses or sectors to develop, and that means that we nowadays can see quite many companies, smaller companies, etc., that is trying to develop this type of tourism. It is not only the fish that has problems, other parts of the ecosystem is also challenged by the water regulation. We can see that many species, plants and animals, living normally along the river, on sandbanks and another type of habitats, are threatened by the very big change in water regulation that is coming with the hydropower production. They are adapted to fluctuations, especially between seasons, having high water levels in springtime, but that is very changed nowadays, and now we have more higher water levels during winter due to the demand for electricity. It is really interesting to be up here at Lake Femunden with a lake level of 664 meters above sea level, and some of the mountain peaks near us here on 1700 meters above sea level, and going down all the way to Karlstad, where the river meets the big Lake Vänern, when we are on elevation of 45 meters above sea level. When the river reaches Karlstad and the river meets the big lake, we can find several types of flood problems, and the modern city is a vulnerable system, and we can find many examples of that. Going all the way from here to Karlstad is maybe not enough. If we see the system down to Gothenburg, then we have passed Lake Vänern and the river Göta älv, and we reach the sea. When we consider the system all that way, we find even more vulnerabilities and problems around the water, and the big city of Gothenburg is really a complex system with every kind of vulnerability that we find in a modern city.